And we are live on Oz Property Investors. We bring the big names and we have the big fun. And this week we've got the big portfolio as well. So the big names, the big fun, and the big portfolio, the three big things.
Wow.
And with a free big, yeah. How you going, Michael? What's happening?
Yeah, no, very, very excited to be on the show.
Yeah, I just love talking property, and you're one of the although it was only a fleeting conversation, you'd be one of the inspirations for me to sort of keep on keeping on and just educating and doing all that sort of good stuff. So thanks for that. How you going, Joe?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm fantastic. I living the dream. I'm excited. I was thinking about this today. I'm like, how many times do I speak to someone that has 39 properties? Like, what questions do I ask? Like, how do you even think? Like, how does 39 even come about? So I'm really ready to unpack this one and learn the secrets. But how are you, Jeff? What's going on with you?
I'm cold. I've got about 15 layers on now, so I feel like apparently I thought it was so really good though. Really excited to chat to Michael and but I just think this is going to be a great session. So we want to, if you've got questions, if you've got comments, throw a like. If you're watching on YouTube, we love all that interaction because that kind of helps us to we want to give you guys value. So and the audience is already rolling in. How good is it? We're already people are absolutely loving it already. So let's get to the quote of the week because I want to sort of help give the audience some great strategies and just some wisdom from you. So we'll throw the guess. What's your quote of the week, Michael?
So I've pondered on this for the last couple of days, and I think this quote encapsulates a lot of the things that we'll talk about tonight in terms of property investing. And the quote is simple but not easy.
Okay.
So all the concepts I'll talk about, one of the things I'll talk about in property investing is simple. I personally don't like to overcomplicate things, but it's not easy. It comes with its challenges of managing 39 properties. It's definitely not beers and Skittles. Is it worthwhile? Yeah, absolutely. But it's definitely not easy. So that's my quote of the week. Simple, but not easy.
I love
Simple,
that one.
but not easy. I love that. Yeah, it's so true. Really just buy a property and sit on it for a long time and it'll do its thing.
That's it.
It's simple to do, but there's so many different ways you can do it. Like you can go with development, you can go with kind of rooming, you can go with all these kind of renovations. There's all these kind of little rabbit holes you can go down. So what's your show? Have you got?
My quote's fantastic. My quote's very relevant to this conversation. The quote is from the Parker brothers, and it is, "The bank never goes broke. If the bank runs out of money, the banker may issue as much money as possible by writing on ordinary paper. It is the rules of monopoly." The bank never goes broke.
Yeah.
I thought that would be.
I was
Perfect.
often the banker in Monopoly. I've never gone broke yet, Joe. So yeah,
Neither does this one. We just keep printing more paper and writing it on there. I'm interested in your thoughts on that as well, Michael, soon, because what your thoughts are of this recent boom and what's kind of caused it, and if it's the printing of money that is what people are kind of pointing to.
It's a big question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think in terms of, it kind of goes back to fundamentals almost. I think it's not really the property prices increasing, but just money losing value. You cannot give that many incentives, handouts, printing of money for not to affect everyday Australians. And I think we're just starting to see that. We're starting to see it in rents. We're starting to see it in construction, and then also in property prices. It's just money losing value.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Jeff, what's your quote of the week?
Well, mine's also kind of because a lot of people saw this session and said, how does somebody buy that many properties and why, how do they keep borrowing capacity? So my quote, I thought, I try and make it relevant. So mine is, it always seems impossible until it's done. And that's by somebody I think is quite a pivotal man in history, Nelson Mandela. So I don't know if people, I studied South African history in high school. And I think Mandela, as much as he has divided people's kind of thoughts, and I think he's kind of brilliant in what he's done, but he has his detractors, of course. But and I think even think back to Roger Bannister, the 4-minute mile. Like everybody said, oh, you can't do it, and this guy just went out there and smashed the 4-minute mile. And after he did, I think there was 4 or 5 people did it in the next 12 months after Roger did it. But and those are some of the questions we're going to be asking you tonight about how you did it and the lessons as well.
No, I'm open book, so I'm more than happy to share everything.
Yeah,
I love it. Okay, well, what we'll do is we'll jump into our ad, but I'm super pumped for this one. 39 properties. You own the Monopoly board. I think you own more properties than there are squares on the Monopoly board. So
trivia question. How many?
that should be the question. So we'll jump into this ad now and be back. The amazing thing with commercial property investing is that in most cases, it's cash flow positive from day one, which means that you can drive those profits towards paying down the debt. There are instances with commercial property investing where you can actually have the property pay itself off over 10 years, which is absolutely crazy. With commercial property, you get massive net yields, so you can expect anywhere between 6 to 10%. And as we've seen in the current boom, these properties not only provide large cash flow, they do certainly grow wildly in value too. Now, with big rewards comes some risk, and this is why you should de-risk your investment as much as possible. And the way you do that is with expert due diligence. And this is why we highly recommend people hire professionals to help you along in your investing journey. Steve Polisi of Polisi Property is one such expert. Being a chartered mechanical and structural engineer in a past life, Steve draws on his analytical and mathematical skills to do that expert due diligence for you. With 6 years experience in the space, Steve has over 1,200 property transactions under his belt. He's the guy you want in your corner, crunching the numbers and finding the best properties in the best locations, along with ensuring that you avoid the mistakes. Steve has actually even written the book on commercial property investing in Australia. And not only is it a bestseller, I believe it to be the most comprehensive in commercial property investing on the market today. He's been generous enough to give us a massive discount for our audience of 50%. So use the code OZPROP, click the link below, get a copy today, and start learning and getting on your commercial property investing journey.
There we go. I mean, you shared some of the properties. I don't know if you recently bought it, but you have a couple of commercial in your property as well. But I'm interested if that's a strategy you're looking to go to. But I actually just looked it up. There's 28 properties in Monopoly board, 40 squares. So you only need another 2 more, and you've got more. Just a little for anybody who ever needs that. Who is the person on this live session tonight? If you haven't heard of him, I'm sure a lot of people said they had heard of you. But you are an award-winning mortgage broker, an active property investor, and you acknowledge your wife. So I think that's important as well, because often some people that just sort of don't acknowledge the people that have helped them or have been in their lives as well. And she's probably a powerhouse, helps you along the way. But you have 39 properties, as we've mentioned, across New South Wales, Queensland, WA. And we're talking about talking before the show about Tassie, but that'd be maybe a question that somebody could ask as well. But 2015, though, you decided you want to go out on your own and become a broker. And that was out of a passion to help people generate the income and achieve financial freedom. But you've won about 15 awards just through a top industry award. So I think you'd almost need a wheelbarrow to carry those home one night. But I think the coolest thing about you, and the thing I remember about you, is you used to play, and you probably still do, play touch footy, but you also enjoy spending time with your family, and you love tinkering on your marine aquarium. So how good is that? Like, how big is your aquarium? Like,
Well, actually, just show you the office tank. I'll just move the camera across.
Okay.
So there you go.
Oh, we've kind of frozen it.
Oh, there it is.
Wow, that's really cool, man. That's amazing.
It's like a screensaver.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's one of the tanks. We've got 3 other tanks on top of it. So yeah, it definitely is a massive time sink.
Literally. There you go. So,
time sink, literally.
Yeah. So let's so I think, Joe, well, one of the first questions we ask is because a lot of people love to are sort of starting out there, sort of finding their way in property. How did it all? Tell us about that first property and just the process you went through.
The first property, to be honest, there was no process. Like, I did so little research. So this was going back 18 years ago. So I would have been 21. And I was out with a bunch of mates. We were playing poker one night. And one of my friends said, "Oh, there's this, unit going up in Epping. So Jeff, you would know Sydney, Epping is, a fairly decent area. And he said, there's this unit complex going up. It's right next to the shopping center. I think it's going to go up a lot. And he was the same age as me. We both knew nothing about property investing. And I thought, hey, actually, that sounds pretty good. So the next day I was in that. Yeah. So the next day I was in that showroom getting shown through the new building, the gym, all the facilities in the building. And I'm like, man, this is so good. I turned around and I asked the salesperson, what's the cheapest building that I can get? It was the cheapest unit I can get into this building. And he came back, he said, it's a bottom ground level studio, all 39 square meters. And I just bought it on the spot.
Yeah. 39 square meters.
Yeah. So literally a shoebox. So this was 2004. And this was when Sydney had boomed. To put it into perspective, in 2004, I paid $340,000 for this. If I sold it today, so what's that? That's 18 years later. Probably lucky to clear 550 to 600 for it.
20 years later, almost.
To put everything in context, at the same time, 340 would have more than bought me a very nice house in Western Sydney on 800 square meters, which will be more than $1 million today.
Yeah.
So I think every single thing that now, or people research, follow the forums and then read, it's, what not to do, I basically did on that first purchase. And I'm still paying the price for it today. I actually still hold it. Actually just reminds me of how bad of an investor I was back then.
Oh, man. It's really really humbling to sort of, and thanks for being so vulnerable and doing that, because I think it's really powerful for people to see that and sort of say, okay, this guy has now got owns a monopoly board basically, and you didn't sort of start. It was very humble investing beginnings. I mean, Epping was very much quite an affluent area and has become even more affluent. But tell us about the other thing I wanted, because you are a broker. So what was the finance? And I sort of know a bit of this story. But what was the finance process for that? Because it was off the plan. So how long did it? Yeah, what did you do?
Yeah, so it was off the plan, and I made the purchase even without a job. And I think that's kind of one of the attractions of off the plan. You basically don't need to think about it for 2 years. And I'm like, well, in 2 years' time, I can probably get enough of a part-time income to be able to service for this. And I still remember it was like a couple of months out from settlement, and it was just such a struggle. And we ended up getting lending from Homeside. And Homeside back then was like a branch of NAB that was really easy to get lending for. And this Chinese broker ended up getting me this loan. I didn't have enough money to settle the property, had to borrow from friends and family just to have the deposit. But yeah, it was a real struggle to get into it.
I'm interested in your backstory. Like, is investing in your blood? Like, have you got your parents, the big property investors? Like, how did you kind of get into that? Was it, how does it kind of look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, coming from an Asian family, you're taught to save. So I was always a fairly decent saver. I wouldn't go out and blow my money in any way. But in saying that, my parents like the idea of investing, but coming new to Australia, they didn't know how to invest like we know today. So their idea of investing was buy a house, sell it a couple of years, buy another house, and then keep kind of moving up the house chain. You end up with a nice house at the end, but you've got no other assets. And they basically follow that model. And we've all often had this chat, if they knew what we knew today, where you could pull out the equity, use that to buy the other property and hold on to that, they will be in a completely different position. So in terms of family influence, yes, parents were like, hey, look, you should save your money and invest. But in terms of investing, it wasn't really taught. It was over time that kind of then got into that. So to answer your question, it was always kind of part of the upbringing, but it was actually just by chance, by luck, that kind of went into property investing the way that I did.
Yeah. Okay. So there was no silver spoon where you got a massive hand up. That's awesome to hear that you just straight out first property?
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying that.
plan.
So for the first 2 properties, it was just through savings. So the first one I mentioned, bought in Epping, and the next one was just down the road in Macquarie Park. And then at that point was when I came across some property forums, read other people's stories, and I just got hooked. I was just obsessed about property investing. And I think my parents could see that this was something different to my previous passions before then. My previous passions before then was touch football and also computer games. So those were the 2 things that engrossed all my time. But they were like, hey, actually, this might be, something that might actually, lead somewhere. So they actually spotted me a 100K loan when I first got into it. So that, along with also the Sydney properties going up, was the initial capital that I had to build everything.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Sorry.
You mentioned you mentioned property forum. So you were I think did you sort of start on, was it still Property Chat back then, or was it Summersoft?
Yeah, it was Summersoft. I'm a big fan of Summersoft. For your listeners, if they haven't come across Property Chat and Summersoft, I highly recommend going on. I learned everything that I know today, the majority of it, either through directly from the forum or people that I met through the forum. So, this was going back in 2013, 2014. There weren't any of these Facebook groups kind of they are today. So this was kind of your avenue back then to learn about property investing. And surrounding yourself with like-minded property investors is one of the most important things that you can do.
Yeah. And what was your kind of evolution? What was the strategy at the beginning? Like, you had all these other people, like, actually, maybe a better question is, who were your mentors? Like, who were you like, yes, I'm going to follow those people and do what they're doing?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, the person that actually inspired me to get into property investing was, and I'm sure a lot of you guys know of him, is Nathan Birch.
Birchie.
We had him on the show.
Yeah. Awesome. So I remember coming across his YouTube page, and this was in 2013, and he will buy these run down fire burnt places in Mount Druitt, spend 30,000-40,000 in doing them up, and then renting them out for positive cash flow. I think prior to that, I would read like books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but it just never felt very applicable, because you were like, well, they're talking about properties with positive cash flow. I looked around Epping, Eastwood, Macquarie, none of it applied. And it didn't really, the dots didn't really connect until I came across Nathan Birch's story. So I remember precisely, he was a year younger than me, and he had at the time 75 properties, and it just blew my mind. It was like, how is it even possible to have 75 properties? He never finished uni, I think, and he would just drive around Mount Druitt in a Bentley, and I thought that was the coolest thing to do. So, but yeah, I mean, it was his story that really got me interested in property investing. Through that story, I then came across Property Chat. Then I networked with investors, sourced my team predominantly from Property Chat. And the person that actually had the biggest, and I would say by far away, my mentor and the one that kind of helped me through the journey was my broker, Rolf Latham, who's also very active on Property Chat. And when I went to Rolf, this was in 2013, I had 2 properties. And had spoken to a whole bunch of mortgage brokers up until that point. And they were like, look, you can buy 1 other property, or you could buy 2 other properties. And I remember precisely, he mapped it out and said, this is where you are. If you follow my steps, then you can get to 12 properties.
What were the steps? Like, how did he have the key that every other broker didn't have? Like,
what are the 12 secret?
I mean, well, I guess one of the main things is, in terms of from a lending philosophy basis, is when you first start investing, you want to use banks that are a little bit harder to borrow from. Mm-hmm. So they tend to be like your major banks. They're a little bit stricter on the lending policies. They won't give you that much money, but they're quite flexible in terms of what they'll allow. Like, say, for instance, if your spouse is on maternity leave, they've got really good maternity leave policies. If you want to pull out equity, great. Within a couple of months, certain banks will allow you to pull out that equity. So they're really good starting banks. But after a couple of properties, they won't lend to you. Then you use banks that are a little bit easier. and then you use banks that are even easier. And if you can use them in the right order, you can actually prolong your lending by quite a lot.
Yeah.
Now, I've shared this before. So this was pre-APRA days. So the lending is a little bit different to what it is today. But when I quit corporate, my salary was around 80,000. And in terms of total loans, I had 3.3 million.
Whoa.
So just think of it from a DTI perspective. It's like absurd. But this was what was possible back then. You can't get to the same certain levels that you can today, but you can definitely have the same philosophy. And we do that with our clients, that you can build a much larger property portfolio. Whereas if you just use the banks in the wrong order, or you just picked banks based on interest rates, that was the key thing that he did for me. So when he kind of mapped out that journey, he was like, this property used for this bank, after this bank, use this bank, and so on and so forth. And that sequence was actually the magic formula to building the property portfolio.
So what does that look like? Like, what did it look like early on for you? Can you map out, like, okay, so this next purchase, you had you had your two that were no strategy, nothing, and then the next, that third one, how important was it, and what did he tell you to get, and then what did you get?
Yeah, so for the third property, I actually used Birchie to buy my third property. That was in a town called Nambucca Heads. I don't know if you've come across that. It's like,
I've heard it. It's done pretty well recently. I mean, it's not quite Byron Bay, but yeah.
Yeah, correct. I mean, recently with COVID and stuff, it's gone very, very well. But for the majority of that time, for the 10 years, it kind of just sat there and then didn't do anything. So we picked it up for 155 off the top of my head. I did a fairly big reno on that, and I overcapitalized the reno. It was my first reno, and I just got very emotionally attached. I wanted a nice stove, nice carpet, nice paint, just spent money where I didn't really need to spend. At the end of it, we ended up pulling out equity. So all the money that I had put into the property, I ended up managing to get back out. And then I use that then to buy the next property and so on and so forth. But the first three, when I got really interested in property investing, were all renovators. So I did that in Nambucca Heads. And the next two I did in Newcastle. And those were the two that kind of really made me realize that, okay, this might actually lead somewhere. And this is in 2013, I was buying Newcastle. I bought one property for 195, a house on 700 square meters, and another house for 220 in Cardiff. So, and then, both of them renovated within a short period of time. We got them revalued, pulled out the equity. And this time the renovation went a lot better. I managed to pull out quite a bit of equity, and then I used that money to then buy elsewhere. So in terms of Rolf's banking sequence, we use banks that allow me to pull out that equity. And then also in terms of their servicing, allow me to then borrow that were a little bit more lenient than the banks that I had used previous to that.
So it sounded as though once you purchased Nambucca Heads and you did the couple in Newcastle, it sounds like there was a deliberate intention to pick up properties where you could add instant value. Was that sort of?
So this was kind of one of the things I thought it would be good to kind of talk about tonight. Is one of the most common questions that I get is, what is your strategy around property investing? Like I hear other people talk about all sorts of different types of strategy. But coming from a broking background, there's actually a very simple way to break it down. So in property investing, there's only two resources that you use. The first resource that you use is your borrowing capacity. So as you buy properties, you chew up your borrowing capacity. It's not unlimited. Eventually it will run out. The other resource that you use is your savings/equity. So how much do you have to put into the deposit? How much do you have to use for renovations and so on and so forth? That will also run out eventually. Now, these two resources are never unequal. At any point in your investment journey, one will be a little bit more than the other, or vice versa. If you want to unlock your investment journey and continue to grow, you just need to identify which of those resources is the one that's holding you back, and spend your time in fixing that. So part of the reason when I first started, I did a lot of renovators, is I didn't have a lot of capital. I had a little bit of money saved and the 100K loan from my parents. So for me to be able to continue to buy properties, I had to manufacture equity. So I knew going into it, I had to buy under market value. I had to create some sweat equity, do the renovations or as much of it as I can myself or on the cheap. And a disclaimer, I can't do any renovations. I can't even change a light bulb, but all I can do is like go and like pick up the rubbish. But that's kind of what we needed to do to then generate the equity. And then once we've got then enough equity, then we can then use that to make other purchases and soak up my borrowing capacity. Now, in other instances, let's say, for instance, later down the path where equity wasn't so much the issue, I had these units in Sydney that were appreciating. I had these Newcastle properties that had generated the equity, but then lending became harder and harder and harder. That's when then you need to shift your focus on strategies that will then generate cash flow or improve your borrowing capacity. So things like buying positively geared properties. That's one of the main reasons why I moved up to Brisbane, Logan. Back then, when I first started buying, this was about 2015, you could get sub $300,000 property houses renting for $400 a week. So it's that 6-7% rental return. And it wasn't because I liked Logan or I liked Brisbane in any way, but those were the only properties that allowed me to move forward. If I kept buying the stuff that I had bought in Newcastle, which at that time, the cash flow numbers wasn't so good, I wouldn't have been able to move forward. So, I've got other clients in similar positions. Then if you want to improve your borrowing capacity, maybe it's things like, second job, buying more cash flow properties, granny flat, those types of strategies. But don't do those types of strategies if your equity position is a one that's lacking, because if you build a granny flat, well, that's going to be negative equity. That's not going to take you forward. So that's why it's quite simple. Just drill it down into those two resources, figure out which one is a resource that's holding you back. And then once you unlock that, then you can then unlock your investment journey.
Yeah, that's super powerful. I mean, it's goes back to your quote. It's very simple. There's only a couple of components. A lot of people sort of like to say, "Oh, I can't get borrowing," and they sort of say they make up all these, or they have not make up, they have all these reasons, or they sort of say, "Oh, I haven't." But in reality, all they need to do is focus on one of those two things, and then that'll which it's not easy though, but it's quite simple.
Correct. Yeah, no, exactly. And I met, some other investors, like say, for instance, they've got their home paid off. They're, got a whole mountain of equity to invest, and they've got, a couple of cycles ahead of them for the properties to double and then do its thing. For those people, I wouldn't be building, granny flats. You've got a long time horizon. You've got the borrowing capacity to strip out that equity and then go ahead and then go down that journey. But on the flip side, if you're a single parent, you've got, a few kids, but you still want to invest, but we can't make it work with that borrowing capacity, then maybe go down the granny flat path. So it's not one strategy fits all, but whichever strategy allows you to cover the resource that's holding you back.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so what in terms of the because 39 properties is a lot of properties. What do you look for in a property? Like, what are the minimum requirements that it actually needs? Because it sounds like you're not actually thinking about properties as properties. You're just looking at them as a vehicle to get you from A to B, in a way.
100%.
How do you think about it? Maybe that's a better question. How do you think about property?
Well, I mean, kind of where to buy, what to buy is the most common question that I get asked outside of broking. But my answer to that is actually pretty straightforward. And you are right. Like, I just purely look at it as a vehicle. I look at it in terms of where I am on my journey and whether that property will allow me to move forward or not. So there were points in time where if I had, I'm saying this in a story. So this was going back when I was very close to quitting corporate. So I think it was like probably 12 or 13, but I knew the writing had been on the wall and I was counting on the days of handing in my resignation letter. So I was like, look, just a couple more properties and I'm out of here. And I came across two deals that had landed on my desk. One was like a high set in Logan, was about $350,000. I could rent out upstairs, downstairs, and get about $500 per week rent. So very good from a cash flow perspective. The other deal was off market, and the person that was selling it, I think, was actually in the council of Logan or somewhere along those lines. It was like, it was politically related, where he couldn't run for something if he had too many properties, so he had to sell some of them off.
Wow.
So it was kind of like off market in that sense, but it was on 1,000 square meters, and it was very, very old house. It was like a 2-bedroom shack, and the rental return on it was terrible. But when I ran the numbers to subdivide it, to develop it, it was freaking amazing. I could make a lot of money from it. And I had these 2 deals, and I couldn't decide, do I buy the one that's cash flow positive, probably won't make as much money from it, or do I buy this other one that I can turn a lot of money? And in the end, I ended up buying the cash flow positive one. And the reason why I picked that one was my main goal was to quit work. If I quit work and let's say my mortgage broking business doesn't take off, imagine holding that property that was yielding at 2% rental return.
Yeah.
It would have been negative. The stress on me, my business, would have been something that I wouldn't want to live with when I'm opening up a new business. It's just too much risk.
And just your relationship as well, I think, because I think that's the untold, not the untold, but a lot of people who may be sort of leveraging themselves quite a lot. If interest rates rise 1 or 1.5 or 2% or whatever it is, which they probably won't, but if they do, then what's the impact on the emotional sort of side of things? Then are you forced to sell that property?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And it's, like when you're forced to sell something, you can't time the market. That's when, unfortunately, I've seen some people take very big hits. So because of that, and I knew that other deal, probably in the grand scheme of things in my lifetime, I wouldn't make as much money. But at that precise point in time, it was more relevant to my goals to add a little bit more cash flow to my finances to be able for me to then start this business. I ended up going with that high set. So I think, to answer your question, Joe, at any point in time, I buy the property that will then take me forward in terms of property investing. So, more on recently, I bought properties, on 4,000 square meters. The rental return is terrible, but we have the ability now to hold it. And then if I can then hold it, develop it, then we'll then gain a lot better from it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what about when people start buying cash flow positive properties to start with, right? Like if all they did was buy those Logan positive cash flow, doesn't the positive cash flow just feed into the beast, which then allows you to have more borrowing capacity, which then allows you to keep going?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely helps. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I wouldn't be here where I am if it wasn't for the properties returning quite well. But what I've found after holding the 39 properties is you're not going to get rich from the positive cash flow. Like, one air conditioner goes, one hot water system goes, well, that's half a year's worth of rental profit.
A roof goes, which a roof could be what, 15, 20, 30,
Correct.
35,000, isn't it? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
And, we have 25 properties in Brisbane in one council, in Logan Council. And recently it got hit by the rains there. So, we have had the SES at 3 of the properties. So all of those things eat into the cash flow. Like, my lifestyle in terms of when I started to now is no different. I'm still driving like a $25,000 car. You don't feel different in any way from that regard. But it's a capital growth that then will change your lifestyle. So from that perspective, do you buy all cash flow? Yeah, I think buying cash flow is helpful, and it will prolong your borrowing to a certain point. But you should also keep in mind, if there is that ability to then buy properties that have that ability to add value, or something that's a little bit more development potential, blue chip across the board, as long as it's neutral, then that's great. But I wouldn't go too far down one path or too far down the other.
Yeah, when you say neutral, what do you mean?
Oh, kind of like neutrally geared, like the rental return covers itself in on that sense. Yeah. So you might say, for instance, buy a few that are quite positive, but that positive income will then allow you to hold something that's a little bit more negative.
Yeah.
And when you say capital growth or equity will change your life, how does that actually? I mean, maybe I'm misquoting or misinterpreting. How does that actually tell us? Yeah.
Well, so I mean, say in Logan, say for instance, properties that you were picking up a year and a half ago for 300,000, 280,000 are now 500,000-600,000. And that's like in the space of a year. I mean, if you hold one of them and it goes up, 300K might not, change too much. But across 25 properties in a year, what's that? That's 7 to 8 mil. So, we still hold the debt and we've still got the loans and, we haven't liquidated or anything like that. But the potential of that leading somewhere, then it's a lot greater. So that's why it's that capital growth that then allows you to then create the wealth in the long term.
Yeah, exactly. The way I like to put it is, what does $100 a week mean for you or $100 a month mean for you? Right? It means X. But what does $100,000 in a year mean for you? That's what's going to allow you to get your deposit back. $100 isn't going to do anything for you. You've got a full-time job. You don't care about that. What you need at the beginning is to build that asset base that can keep growing and then have the cash flow once you hit that. It sounds like once you hit that borrowing capacity wall, how can I start feeding the borrowing capacity beast? And what does the borrowing capacity beast want? He wants cash flow, and he wants you to feed him as much free cash flow to give you a higher income that's going to allow you to re-leverage. But how do we kind of do that in this day and age? How do we go ahead? Everyone in this group is every second post, I've hit a ceiling, I've hit a ceiling, I've hit a ceiling. Like, what do we do when we've hit that point? So
the three things that I've jotted down here in terms of 3 tips in terms of lending to be able to then continue to borrow. One of the most important things, and by far the biggest difference, is lender selection. And find a good broker to be able to map that out for you. And if they have that philosophy in mind, they'll be able to then create that map for you. So it's not necessarily going for the bank with the cheapest rate, but it's picking the banks based on the ability for you to borrow from them, saving the easier to borrow from banks a little bit later, and then using them in the right order. That will be by far away the biggest increase. Like, I've got so many clients come to us and say, hey, look, I think I'm tapped out. But then once we model them out and we know exactly, okay, which banks you should be using, turns out they can borrow like another mil or maybe another 2 or 3 properties. So the bank selection by far away is the biggest. The second one, and I'll put a prerequisite, not a financial advisor, double check with your accountant on this, but being interest only actually makes a huge difference to your property portfolio in terms of being able to grow that property number in the long run. So it's a little bit counterintuitive in the sense that if you use certain banks in the beginning, if you go principal and interest, you can borrow a little bit more. So some people fall into the trap where when they buy the first couple of properties, they automatically go principal and interest because they can borrow, a little bit more based on the bank servicing calculators, and they tend to be the major banks. Now, there are certain lenders out there. So say, for instance, like your Pepper Moneys and also your Liberties, when they assess how much money to lend to you, they base it on your actual repayments. So your actual monthly repayments on the loans. So naturally, property investors, if they have a good accountant, they structure it interest only anyway. If all your prior properties are interest only, then when you hit a bank like Pepper, you can borrow quite a bit more.
And of course, the only challenge is you're probably not always, but you may pay a slightly higher rate, and you might not be able to borrow sort of 90% LVR. I think Pepper and they sort of look at
Pepper's
80
better at 80%. Correct. Yes, correct. So there are limitations to that, and yes, the rate could be a little bit higher, but then that comes down to the difference. Do you want a property portfolio of say 3 properties or 5 or 6 properties? 10. Yeah. So there's also a lot of other things to consider in that. So when you're building a property portfolio, you don't necessarily want, say, if all your properties are interest only, for them all to go principal and interest in the same month. Like, that will have a massive effect on your cash flow. So there does come a fair bit of planning around with it. But kind of holistically, if you ask me for a tip, having your loans as interest only will prolong your borrowing in the long run.
Yeah. And one thing that I often get, so I work with a lot of clients that are doing principal and interest, and they were always like, well, I really like paying down debt. Like I like getting that money, and I like it having kind of a forced savings in a way. But the thing is, with interest only, if you do decide to go interest only, you can still save the exact same money instead of actually putting the principal into the loan where you can't get access to it. Put that principal and interest payment, the exact same P&I loan that you were having before, $1,200 a week instead of $800. Put that into your offset account, and then you've got liquidity and access to that capital to be able to go again.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, and it's I think the thing with that too is if you look in the general media, you read the news, a lot of the commentary around interest only is it's bad, and potentially, like I agree, for 95% of Australians can't save to save themselves. So in those instances, if you've got money and if you're not paying down your home loan, you're going and blowing it, then I agree principal interest is the best thing to do. But if you've got investors that are savvy and listening to this podcast, and they can manage their money, and if it's sitting in the offset account and they're not tempted by it and not going to spend it, then it's very powerful because you've got an additional buffer. You can then use that to reinvest. And then later down the path, it also improves your borrowing capacity. So it all comes down to your own management of money. But yeah, that's the perfect point, Joe. Yeah.
Was there a third tip in there, or was that because your lender selection, you've got considering your your interest only? Was there a third one, or we kind of?
Yeah, so the third one's not so much related to lending. I mean, the lending is really important, but it's more so kind of just overall property portfolio building. Buying properties with a little bit better rent is really, really important. It's it's important on a couple of different levels. The first one is just purely from a cash flow basis. And kind of touching on that point before, I said that the positive cash flow won't make you rich. And like you won't feel any different. But the main thing that it allows you to do is if you lost your job or you lost your source of income, you're not forced to sell your property portfolio. Now, I'm not against like blue chip or, properties that are closer to the CBD. I mean, I think those properties are great. But for a lot of investors, if they lost their job and their entire property portfolio was yielding at 2%, then they might be forced to sell those properties. And I had clients during COVID that happened. And that was when I actually really saw it happen on a mass where, some clients lost their job. They had these properties that were negative and they were forced to sell. And imagine selling your property in the depth of COVID. And if they've held onto it for an extra 12, 18 months, where's the market now? So that really kind of, it's like a completely different world. So it really honed in on that message in terms of you're not trying to make money or get rich from the positive cash flow. It's just so that you can hold the properties even if you lost your source of income. So then you can then time the market. And then on top of that, the positive cash flow will also allow you to borrow a little bit more. And kind of what I've come to realize in terms of property investing, the property is more so just a number. What you actually make money from is an overall base. So, like we all read about property cycles in Australia. The average property cycle is 7 to 10 years. Property prices tend to double. Certain areas, hasn't doubled, or some areas have done a little bit better. But it's actually the base that you have doubling in that property cycle that really makes a difference. So what do you mean base? Base. Okay. So
how much money?
Yeah. So let's say you've got a $2 million property portfolio doubling. The 2 goes to 4. Then you've netted 2 to $1 million, like very, very simple. But if you were able to hold a $10 million property portfolio and that doubled in a cycle, then you stand to gain 10 million. It's actually then trying to hold a bigger enough base for that doubling effect to happen. Now, most people can't hold that bigger base because of, the cash flow or the rental return not kind of being sufficient there. So being able to buy property that are a little bit more positive just allows you overall to hold a slightly bigger base.
Yeah. So one thing I'm interested in is why, because that's the goal, right? To build the bigger base. Why did you go for much more cash flow rather than something that's a little bit more neutral that had extra growth. Because the way I'm looking at the way you saw Logan was not because you saw this new hotspot that was going to unlock the potential of growth. It was purely because Logan has cash flow and you're like, I need cash flow, so I need to do it. Like, why didn't you do, why weren't you buying in Moreton Bay, for instance? Moreton Bay is very positive cash flow. Yield's not there, but
correct. That's actually really good. For most of the time, I was investing in Logan, and this was around a couple of years ago, where a lot of people were buying Brisbane, and I was actually telling my clients, I'm buying in Logan, but I think Moreton Bay has more potential. So I mean, so I'll kind of explain that on a few different levels. So the main reason why I started buying in Logan was because of the positive cash flow. And at that time, that suited my lending criteria. If I weren't buying the 6-7% rental returns, it was hard for me to build a property portfolio. And, one property led into 2, 3, and I kept buying in the area. And there was a period of time I was living in Sydney and I was buying in Logan. And I had a standing, like every 2 weeks, I would book a flight and go to Brisbane. So on Saturday, I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, catch the flight, hire a car, go through all the open homes, 3 o'clock, drive back, fly back, and then come back to Sydney. And on the flight back, I'm like dead tired. And for a lot of those trips, you'll come back empty-handed. And even in my mind, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, this is absurd. But through that process, because I was always there, going through the open homes, a lot of the agents got to know me. I got to know them. We became good friends. And then you ended up then just creating that network, and the deals that I could personally get in Logan was far better than Moreton Bay. I think in a nutshell, the Moreton Bay properties would do better. If I had 0 connections and I was starting from scratch in those latter years, I probably would have bought in Moreton Bay. And I had some of my clients buy in Moreton Bay and do phenomenally well. But it was just purely because of the connections that I had built. I could buy properties before they hit the market, or I knew if the vendor was very desperate through the agent, I could get those deals that otherwise I couldn't. So
they would already have capital growth built in. They would have $40,000, $50,000 cash capital, and then you're getting your cash flow. So you're getting the growth now and your cash flow in a couple of cash flow straight away.
Yeah.
Well,
and then
I was going to say it's something that Hayden talks about, Joe. He kind of says it's all about there's deals everywhere, but it's just can you actually find the right price to pick up that property? Because if you were to pay retail or the price that the vendor sort of would like to get, then it's not going to perform as well. But it's amazing.
100%. Yeah, and it's just like when I get asked where should I buy, my answer is so generic. It's like honestly, it doesn't really matter. But what's actually more important is knowing that area well enough that the good pockets versus the bad pockets, the agents. I mean, it's not easy. Like the concept is simple, but again, it's not easy. It's not easy to get to that level. So, the deals
how long did it take you to get to that to get comfortable? You knew that or did you? Yeah.
I think initially comfortable, probably maybe a 3 to 6 month process. And, we can delve into it, how I started buying in, because buying in Brisbane when I was in Sydney was a big leap of faith. It was actually Rolf that kind of pushed me down that path. I was just so wedded to buying something that I could touch and feel. The fact that it was in another state was just a massive leap of faith. When I kind of went down that process, probably a good 3 to 6 months. But if you look at my earlier purchases in Logan compared to my most recent ones, like absolute rubbish. Some of my properties in Logan actually not that good.
What were some of the mistakes that you felt you made with some of those properties?
The worst purchase that I made in Logan was actually my 10th property. It was actually a goal that I had in mind, something that I created myself where I hit double digits properties. It was like a massive thing. I thought, you'll get 10 properties and streamers would just fall from the sky going, well done, you've got double digits.
Like video games, hit God mode or something.
Yeah. And it's like, I just so wanted to get there. and I rushed the purchase, absolutely rushed it. So I bought this property where, and we can talk about another kind of property investment tip that I have after this story, but I say, like, don't buy a house that slopes down from the street. Mainly because
it slopes away from the street, right?
Yeah, correct. So the street's here, but the house is lower than the street.
Yeah.
Mainly because every time it rains, it will just go in your front door. And the rain in Brisbane is like different in Sydney. It just buckets down. Like, it just pisses down like no tomorrow. And then an hour later, it's gone. And that house, since I've been holding it, I think we've changed the carpet there 3 times, because every time it rains, like, underneath just gets flooded. The other
sort of tiles, maybe.
Yeah, we did think about it, but I think it's because it's uneven and stuff like that. Even the tiles is not like feasible down there. So, and the other thing too is I bought it from the owner that did all the renovations themselves, and it's like the shortest renovation. So up until now, I probably sank about 50,000 into that property, and it's still got continual issues. Got to the point where afterwards, when I had it leased out, we thought that the tub was connected to the drain. Like, it wasn't even connected. They just put a tub on top of the bathroom. So it was just so shonky. And I had paid a high price for it. I rushed it. I didn't do my due diligence on it. And it was just because I wanted to get to number 10. So a lot of the times I was speaking to investors now, it's actually just because of those lessons. I'm like, take your time, be patient. There's always a deal out there. Sometimes you feel the market's getting away from you, but from, you know, being broking now for 7 years and every week seeing deals come across my desk, next week there will still be a deal out there for you.
Yeah, there's always another deal. I was just looking at a location where I'm looking to get out now because we're running out of deal. Like, there's no deals there. The price has moved beyond what it was. And then in the inbox sold, you know, $100,000 less than it should have. Like, you know, there is always something, even if it looks like it's out of whack. Always go back and check it out and make sure that it's something 100%. There, because there's always value. It's always 100%. Something. Someone's got to. People are always moving. People are always, you know, dying. There's always getting divorced. You know, people need to move on quickly. So if you can help stitch a deal together, you can do it. So what I mean, you've got 25, 26 in Logan. Why didn't you shift away from that? Like, or why is there not there are other suburbs in Australia that have the same demographic, the same fit as Logan, right? The same rental return. Like, why didn't you change?
Well, I mean, this was my thought process going from 2015 all the way up to 2020. I mean, for that period, for everyone that was buying in Brisbane, I still remember on Property Chat, there was a thread every single year. This is going to be the year of Brisbane. And it was 2015. Then it was 2016. It was 2017. And for 5 straight years, Brisbane literally just didn't do anything. So the numbers that had worked for me before.
Can you hear me, Joe?
Yeah.
We're still here.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Michael's frozen. Okay.
So the numbers that had worked for me before were still working for me at the time. And a lot of it comes down to just the relationships that I had built. And as I bought more properties, the deals became better. And also it was just, there's a discussion that I always have with clients around diversification. And like, I mean, you can tell I'm not big in that category. And part of the kind of thinking that I have is also reading Warren Buffett's book. Like, if you read Warren Buffett's share investing book, the number of shares that Warren Buffett holds is actually very small. He only has a couple of companies that he's very vested in, but he knows them inside out. So when it comes to that, for that period of time, and be it wrong or right, I was just so certain about Logan. When I looked at in terms of Australia, I was like, where can you buy somewhere that's 30 minutes drive from the CBD? That's 300,000. That rents for 6 to 7% rental return. And each time I was buying, I was, making $40,000, $50,000 on the way in. And also on top of that, it hadn't moved for a decade. And when I looked at other areas, so Adelaide was another one. And Adelaide,
Elizabeth maybe, or did you look up Elizabeth Way or?
Yeah, so all around that way. And I guess, like you would have done very well by buying Adelaide too. But the only reason why I picked Brisbane was because it was on the eastern seaboard. So I'm like, well, if Sydney and Melbourne go up, then Brisbane, being a fairly large city compared to Adelaide, then should have more demand. So I picked that. Other areas in terms of in Australia, well, Perth for those years wasn't doing too well. Hobart, I mean, Hobart again would have been really, really good, and is another area that I didn't get right in terms of investing there. But I just looked at kind of population. So I just take a very simplistic approach in the sense that it was the third largest city in Australia, close to the CBD, 30-minute drive. For what I was getting, I couldn't find anywhere else. And because I was getting those good deals, had those relationships in place. And yeah, I mean, some of it also comes down to comfort and also ease. It was a lot easier to buy in Logan. I had my team there. I had my property manager. I had my building and pest inspector. I had a team. It was, it was no different to going and buying groceries to buying property in Logan. So that was part of the reason.
Stop down to local worse and buy yourself a property.
But yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, but also like it comes to a point too. So recently, like I stopped buying in Logan. It's I would like to buy at those price points, but eventually, because the market has moved, it will drive you away. I'm not going to buy something with 4 or 5% rental return where a year ago there was 6-7%, and I could have bought it for $200K cheaper. So eventually, I was forced to move away, and that's what's happened in the last year.
So where is the new Logan? Like, where is the new Logan for you?
Yeah, so Perth. I can say not just for myself, but in terms of, I guess the best and where I kind of see the trend too is just doing broking. Where are clients, where are investors buying out there? And I guess lucky for the industry that we can see that almost kind of I'm lag in that sense, and you're being at that forefront. But there's been a massive shift in the last 3 to 6 months, where previous to that, this time last year, we weren't doing that many purchases in Perth, maybe a handful, to the point where now Perth is more than any other area in Australia.
Wow.
For your loans.
Yeah.
How many sort of loans are you putting for a month? Are you talking sort of 10, 15, 20 or 30?
Loans, submissions, you'll be around about 50 to 60. Yeah.
Wow. I guess so. Yeah. So we're not just talking like 5 loans here. We're talking sort of,
No, I mean, anywhere between 15 to 20 million's worth. And the majority of it is in Perth. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Super interesting. What's driving people over to Perth then?
I mean, everyone do on their own research, but this is just my feel from Perth. Like, Perth to me really feels like what Brisbane was like a year and a half ago.
Okay.
For ever since 2008, it hasn't done anything. It's even now, like this week, I had a contract come across my desk. The previous owner bought it in 2016 for $385, and my client bought it 6 years later for $376. Yeah. And this is a 4-bed, 2-bath on 600 square meters in a decent suburb of Perth. So 6 years inflation, and look at what 6 years has done for Sydney, Melbourne, and also Brisbane, whereas you're buying it cheaper. I bought a property. So this was the last purchaser bought it in 2008 for $385, and I bought it last year for $276.
Wow.
Sorry, what you did?
What? So in 2008, the previous owner bought it for $385,000.
Yeah. In WA.
In WA. I bought it last year for $276,000.
That's a painful.
So 14 years later. So they are bought at the previous peak, and it just hasn't done anything. And you can just feel it. Like, if you read property chat, speak to some other investors, I feel that investors are getting a bit more on it as opposed to kind of the mass market. But there is definitely a shift towards investors in Perth in the last 6 months.
Yeah, definitely. I was in Perth 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, looking, doing the on-the-ground research to find, and it's definitely a different world over there than we expect. Like, from eastern states, there's a lot of opportunity and potential there for sure, and the cash flows there. But what are your thoughts about the growth prospects and the mining side of things? Like,
So I think there'll always be a risk. I'm under no illusion that Perth will not be more like Perth will be more volatile than I feel some of those other cities just because of the nature of Perth. But I think part of that also depends on when you enter the market. If you're entering right at the peak, then I will be a little bit, wary in terms of what the future holds for me. But if the market hasn't done anything for 14 years, you're buying at rental returns of 6-7%. And the other big thing that I look at when I'm looking at property is actually the replacement cost. So, I'm sure you guys have spoken. And so, like in the areas that I'm buying, Perth, say, for instance, a vacant block of land on 600 square meters is going for about 220. And the first property that I bought, suburb called Greenfields, 311,000, 4-bed, 2-bath. So what can you build for 90,000? You can't build a 2-bedroom granny flat for 90,000. So even to replace that, you can't. So that's why it's so good for value. And for the better half of, from 2015 to 2020, that was the same case in Brisbane. All these properties you were buying, you couldn't replace because they were just costing you more to buy the land than build the house. So that was so good value. And just in a very short span of time, they've all gone up to their replacement cost. So I feel a similar thing will also happen in Perth.
Well, there was actually a stage in, I think it was, I don't know, don't quote me the year, it was 2009, 2010, where Perth was actually as expensive as Sydney.
It was crazy.
And you sort of say, well, that's insane now that Sydney is, I don't know what, let's say 900,000 if you factor in units as well. And if you just do houses, about 1.4, 1.5. So just imagine, and Perth median now is about sort of what, 550. So it's a big disparity there.
And one of the kind of things that kind of held me back from Perth before was also the vacancy rate. It was, even if you bought the property, you just couldn't get it rented out. And I'm not sure of the exact reason. I would love to kind of find out, but just the vacancy rate is so low in Perth. It's like less than 1% across so many suburbs. And even my own experiences and also clients' experiences when they rent out a property, people offering more than what you've listed at just to get the property. So
I think it's simple supply and demand, I'd say, because there was a big building kind of thing go through in Perth around that sort of time. And there wasn't a need to build because they just oversupplied. And now there's sort of a slot. There's not as many.
A bit of catch up. And I'm guessing if property prices are coming down, the builders aren't actively building their either. So you've just have this scenario now where there's a chronic undersupply.
Yeah, and we still got 2 years before they can pop a building up to soak up that demand. I'm interested in what your asset selection type is. So, like, how do you bought these ones recently in WA, which is amazing. So, do you look at it from a specific yield perspective? Do you look at it from a specific cash flow perspective? What makes you choose this asset?
Okay, yeah. So I've got pretty simplistic rules in terms of choosing an asset.
Okay, there you go.
I mean, again, it's simple, but not easy. So I would try to hit a capital city. I think you can do very well regionally. And, with COVID, I've seen clients do amazingly well regionally. But I think if you go in the long run, just purely, again, demand and supply, I prefer to be in capital cities. And overall, I just try to be as close to the CBD as I can for the cash flow that I feel is acceptable. If at that point in time I deem that, look, I need 6-7% to be acceptable, then Logan was the closest that I could get. I mean, I would love to be, buying in Mount Gravatt, Holland Park, those areas, but if they're giving me 2-3%, it was going to meet that criteria. So capital city, as close as I could get. Those are the really main ones. The other one is I actually have kind of like a saying philosophy that I follow. So this is kind of generic, and it comes from the theory that in life you make money by solving problems.
Yep.
So say for instance yourself, Joe, you find your clients' properties, you solve a need in the market for that, you do a great job, and then you get rewarded for that. If you look at, say, richest person in the world, Elon Musk, the problems he solves are huge. Electric car problem, sending satellites into space, putting mankind onto Mars eventually. So his problems that he's solving are massive, and that's why he's also massively rewarded for it, and he's the richest person in the world. So you take that same approach to property investing. When you go into a property, try to solve problems. The more problems you can solve, the more money that you'll make. Now, when you first start, don't try to solve big problems, maybe small problems. But as you go along and you become more experienced, then the problems you solve can be bigger and bigger. Now, I've broken this down into two types of problems in property investing. So there's two types of problems. One is money can solve problems. Okay. So I'll give you an example of that. You walk into a property and it's got a dirty kitchen. The color of the paint is 3 different colors in 3 different bedrooms.
Yep.
Yeah. Someone threw a packet of Skittles at it.
Yeah. And, like the kitchen is like, the stove has never been, touched or washed in the last couple of years. Those types of problems, when I see, I get really excited because you solve that problem, you stand to gain from it.
Easy peasy.
Yeah. But there's other problems that money can't solve. So what are those types of problems? Like, say, for instance, your property is on a busy road. Your property is in a flood zone. It's on a slope, just like the one that I bought underneath the street. It's next to a power line. It doesn't matter how much money you throw at that property, that problem will always be there. I tend to not buy those properties. You'll find that you buy those properties a little bit cheaper, but when you go to sell those properties, it will also be a little bit cheaper. Because
and the valuation is tends to be an issue as well, does it? Because the valuer looks at it, and as much as they want to say that there's a science behind it, they are human beings at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. Like I've had valuations where they'll look at you're next to the power line, and then the lender won't accept it. So all of those will then play an issue. So to break it down, when I go into property, I try to solve problems. But then you break down those problems and then you ask yourself, is that a money can solve problem? Or is that a money can solve problem? Or is that a money can't solve problem? If there's a money can't solve problem, I generally tend to walk away from those.
What are some of the other money can't solve problems? So we've got main road, we've got under power lines, flood zones,
bushfire,
bushfire zones.
Sloping block or blocks that are irregularly shaped. You might have a really funny shaped block. So there's not that much that you can do about that. Next to a school, so you don't necessarily want, screaming kids at your front door with a bus stop there. There'll be a money can't solve problem. So I think, there's heaps of them. So when you just look at that property and you're asking yourself, like sometimes it's like, I get this question. So the property might be close to a flood zone, but it's not quite. It's like, one house away or something like that.
Yes.
If you're asking yourself about that problem, chances are when you go to sell it, someone else will be asking the same question. So that problem will still be there.
Well, actually, that's a really good point. And Logan's a classic example of that. So these recent floods, you may have bought a property that is next to a flood zone, but that property now may be in a flood zone because they're now having to remap absolutely everything. So you do have to also be careful of like, okay, the flood zone's here. I'll just buy the next door neighbor. So I'm absolutely fine. But now there is going to be thousands of properties in Logan that are now in a flood zone that weren't previously.
And then, to on that, it's if you have that hesitation, then when you go to sell that property, say, for instance, you have 10 potential buyers. Well, 6 of them may be okay with it, but 4 of them won't be. Then the price that you get for that property may not be as good. So if there is that inkling of a money can't solve problem, I try not to buy those properties.
How would you classify an area that may not be necessarily as desirable, or a street, for example? Because Logan, there's a lot of controversy. So do you kind of steer clear of streets, for example, that
I do.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's money.
So like, say, for instance, so kind of like, there's good pockets and bad pockets of a suburb.
Yep.
And that granular information is like so important to buying. So say, for instance, if you think to the suburb that you live in, so I grew up in Eastwood. And for people that are in Sydney know about Eastwood, there's 2 sides of Eastwood. There's a Korean side and also a Chinese side, and they're completely different. And other suburbs will have similar things. So if, say, for instance, we talk about Logan specific, I think Woodridge is a good example. Woodridge is a little bit rougher demographic. The roughest pocket of Woodridge is around the station. So if you can't, say, for instance, afford to buy a car, you need public transport, a lot of those tenants are living around Woodridge Station. Also around Woodridge Station, there's a high concentration of housing commission. So you'll see properties come up cheap around Woodridge Station to the left-hand side of there, but I tend to not to buy those because they're cheap for a reason, and it's a money can't solve problem. Well, you can't really affect that unless
it's going to take time.
Correct. But there's other pockets of Woodridge. So the areas around Trindle Park Station or on top, so above Smith Road on Woodridge in that upper pocket, that's brilliant. At the top tip of Woodridge, it's only like 15 minutes drive to the CBD. So that area completely fine. So even in terms of more detailed on that suburb, like the upper pockets of Woodridge, they opened up a new suburb called Karratha Forest or something, like there's a name to it. And it's literally Woodridge, but it's on the left-hand side. And the land there goes for like 500,000-600,000. And it's just like a different name.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's literally on the same like level in terms of the street. So
I think name doesn't have a stigma.
Correct. So it really comes down to drilling down on that suburb. So as long as you know the suburb to that level of detail, then you'll be able to kind of beat other investors. Another investor might see a cheap price and go, oh, that's really, really good. But they bought in a very heavy housing commission area. Whereas you might have bought something that may not be as cheap, but has that potential in Upper Woodridge and will actually do really well.
Yeah, that's what I always say. Like the data leads you to the location, but you then have to get on the ground and find out what are the hot spots and what are the not spots that people don't want to do. What we'll do now is we'll jump into our final ad for the evening, and then jump into some of the questions, because a whole heap of questions here, because I'm cautious of the time, and I appreciate all the walkthrough you've done so far. This has been absolutely sensational.
I think we're going to have to do a round two.
You're going to have to do
We'll come back on if we're not there.
Let's do it. This live session is sponsored by Scott Agate from Hello House. Scott's created the world's first property negotiation as a service business. So what does that mean? Well, let's think about it. When was the last time you negotiated on anything over $100, let alone a property that is going to be one of the biggest investments of your life? The vendor, they have a trained negotiator on their side in the form of a real estate agent. That's kind of like you stepping into the ring with Mike Tyson after never training a day of boxing in your life. These guys are trained professionals, and that's what they do day in and day out. And this is what Hello House does every single day as well. They negotiate on property to get the best buy price from the real estate agents. Scott Agate, he's the expert negotiator. He has been in this industry since 1995. He owned and operated 3 Bell franchises. Scott was the guy that was teaching these real estate agents all these agent games. He knows all of their tricks. Having him on your side is going to give you a massive unfair advantage and literally save you tens of thousands of dollars. Unlike other ways of purchasing property, Scott's incentives are aligned with you, the buyer, meaning the more money he saves you, the more money he makes, which is what you want. You need to have those incentives aligned. Scott has kindly offered our group a massive discount on the retainer fee for his service. So if you're looking to buy your next home or investment property, click the link below to get in touch.
There we go. And so David Oller's already saying he does want a round two. So, geez, it's and the amount. I think this is the second most watched live we've ever had, Joe, as well. So, and ours, I think we came in third. And Birchie, somebody you learned off was, I think he hit the 300 viewers at any one time. But anyway, there's this. It was crazy.
Go Birchie.
Yeah. Before we get into that though, while Joe, maybe Joe, you should pick some of the questions. I think you picked a really good, whereas I just throw any random old question up. The one thing you spoke a lot about was team. Like, how did you actually vet? How did you do due diligence on your team? Like, what were the questions you asked them?
Yeah. So I spent a good 6 months forming my team when I first started. So I didn't buy any properties when I found the whole property chat got really engrossed in it. And I just spent 6 months forming my team. And I interviewed 3 or 4 different brokers, a couple of accountants. And the interview question that I had for the accountant was, should I buy in my own name or should I buy in a trust? Because when I was starting out, I just did not know that answer. And it was just a burning question that I had. And based on the answers that the accountant gave me, I ended up selecting that accountant. And I'm still with that accountant today. So he gave me a great answer. So I've grown with him my entire journey.
What was their answer to that? I mean,
okay, cool. All right. So, I mean, we'll take a little bit of time. We'll share the answers. So, I mean, so this was when I'm, single, working corporate, PAYG.
Yep.
And I asked him, should I buy in a trust? And he said, Michael, the 3 advantages of buying in a trust is 1, asset protection. So how many people are going to sue you? And I'm like, I am working market research, PAYG, not many people. So he's like, all right, that benefit doesn't really apply to you. His second one was income distribution. If the property is very positive, you can then channel that positive income to someone, your spouse on a lower tax bracket, or to yourself.
Yep.
At the time I was single, no one to distribute to. So that didn't affect me. The third one was asset allocation. So you can pass it to your children, your family a little bit easier. Again, no one in the family. So he's like, out of those 3 benefits, 0 apply to you. Why do you even want to buy in a trust? And he basically kind of spelled out the pros and cons. I won't go into it in too much detail, but there are also a lot of cons in buying in a trust. Like, say, for example, in New South Wales, if you buy in a trust, you pay land tax from day one.
Yep.
And I know when I first started, I went to all these seminars, listened to these podcasts,
the gurus.
Gurus, and they were like, just, buying in trust is the best thing ever, best thing since sliced bread. And I taught my parents, we were going down this investment path. When my parents went to buy an investment property in New South Wales, they bought it in a trust. And at the end of the first year, they got a bill for $5,000, and they were like, Michael, what's this?
Well, they didn't know they didn't seek, or they just said, "I'll buy in a trust."
Yeah, correct. They took my word for it, and they bought in the trust. So every year since we've held that property, they've been paying $5,000. So,
that's
why it's an
expensive mistake.
I know, well, and then, 100%. So,
on that, speaking of land tax, you own 25 properties in Queensland. How does land tax, do you have a massive land tax bill? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, it's not good. You deal with it by paying it. No, land tax is not good. I mean, in Queensland, luckily, there are certain ways to get around it. So in your own name, you get $600,000 threshold. In my missus' name, she's got $600,000 threshold. Every trust you set up comes with $350. So we set up a trust, use the $350, set up another trust, so on and so forth. I think we're up to 5 trusts now in Queensland. But even on top of that, we've still got a large land tax bill. So there are certain ways to get around it. But at the end of the day, it's unfortunately the cost of doing business.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyone that's got any questions, throw them into the comment box and we will try and jump on them. One thing that I think is interesting is managing risks. How do you determine the appropriate amount of buffer to manage those risks?
That's a really good question. That's one that I get commonly asked. And the best way I've found over time to answer that is and it's individual, it's different for everyone. What amount do you have in your bank account that will allow you to sleep at night? So for some of clients that I work with, they want to have 6 months worth of interest repayments saved there. When they have that amount, they feel comfortable, they can go to sleep at night. I know when I was first investing, I flew very close to the sun. Every single dollar that I had, I will put back either in a renovation or to the next property. I did have somewhat of a safety net. I knew that if I completely stuffed up, lost all the money and this was the wrong avenue to go for, then I could go to my parents and then ask for some help in that way. So I had somewhat of a confidence to fly really, really close to the sun. Now, today, would I do that? Absolutely not. I've got wife, 2 kids. Would I go to those levels? My wife would not allow me. She'll smack me across the head. So we've got a much larger buffer now compared to before. So that's why there's no right or wrong answer. It really depends on yourself, your situation, your family scenario. And if you've got that amount and you can sleep at night, then that's the right amount for you.
Well, one thing actually I've got a question on is because we have a lot of small business owners within our group, and this is one of the things that we didn't really touch on in the in this session, is that the reason you've been able to buy 39 properties is not because you're on a PAYG anymore. That got you to a certain limit, but what you did was you started your own business, which allowed you to leverage against that business. So how do you think about leveraging through property as a small business? Like, how should someone in a small business think about property investing?
So, I mean, unfortunately, unfortunately, the nature of the beast is if you want to borrow from the banks want to see that you're making money. There's no way around it. And the way that we've been able to borrow and buy more properties has been increasing and doing well on the business front. There's no question. There's no way we would have achieved what we have if I stayed PAYG. Now, in terms of business owners, I think that's a question between you and the accountant. And when you come to do the tax return, I remember like the most important year for me during kind of that phase was my second year, because for a lot of business owners, your ABN needs to be registered for 2 years before you can get any lending. So I remember when I did my second year tax return, my mandate to my accountant wasn't to maximize my deductions or to claim as much as possible. My mandate to them was I want to actually pay more taxes. I want to show the company to be as profitable as possible. If I had to pay an extra, couple of, tens of thousands or whatever in terms of taxes, but it will allow me to buy X number of properties, then that was the hit that I needed to take. So unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast. So that's a planning that you'll have between your accountant and also your mortgage broker. As a business owner, no one wants to pay too much tax. Like it's, no one wants that. But you also need to have enough to be able to do what you want to do on the property front. And between you, your accountant, and also your broker, you can then come up with a strategy around that.
Yeah, because there's generally two ways to do it: save money on tax as a business and live lifestyle, or leverage that business, which means you're going to have to pay some tax to be able to do it.
Not that Joe's giving accounting advice here, but
no accounting advice.
You can't be running a fish and chip shop, declaring 40,000 and then wanting to build a $10 million property portfolio. It just can't work.
Yeah, this is actually a good question here. Yeah, because you're Mr. Bentley around Mount Druitt. You're a Maserati around Logan. What's going on?
On the car front, I'm not a car person, so I've had friends go down this journey, and we've had started buying properties at the same time, gone off and run businesses, and I won't name names or anything, but he's driving very nice cars at the moment. But that's his interest. Cars just don't float my boat. If there was a vice that I have, it's corals and saltwater fish and aquariums. That's why I've got 4 tanks. And if you friends with me on Facebook and stuff, like half the time I'm just buying corals online. So that's my vice.
Those would be expensive, I imagine. Some of those fish would, and just to maintain.
Yeah. So
that's a good. That's an affordable hobby as opposed to what else is out there.
I mean, corals are getting more and more expensive. So it's getting less and less affordable.
One question I've got. Well, one question that came up in the previous was, why are you still going? Why? I mean, you've got almost $1 million in cash flow. Well, maybe not cash, maybe not $1 million, but you've got a substantial amount of money coming in. You literally could sell down now, put all the money in a bank account, earning 2% interest. But why? Why are you still going?
To be honest, I don't have the perfect answer for that. And it's one that I constantly ask myself. It's like, when is enough? And I haven't got the right answer for that. But one thing I do know is I don't want to pull up stumps and then have to come back and then do something. It's like, you read about people that went down the financially free path And then 10, 15 years later, because of inflation, because of kids' expenses, they're like, oh, crap, I have to go back at their work. I want to make sure that when I pull up stubs, that's never a question. So when is enough? Can't answer that question. And the hardest part of answering that question, honestly, is what I'll do with my time. And I'll share a story. And he might actually, eventually come across it and then listen to this. But he's, a good friend of mine and also inspiration. Jeff, I might know him. It's called Stephen Ryan.
Yeah, Steve Ryan. Yeah, did Steve go to? Is that the guy who went to South America?
Correct. Oh no. So he went to South America. Yeah, correct. He went to South America, and now he's got a very, very successful YouTube channel that talks about Tesla shares. It's called Solving the Money Problem. So anyone that wants to watch about Tesla and shares, by all means, go and watch that. So both me and Stephen went down the same path. We went down property investing. We started our mortgage broking business at exactly the same time. We lived Airbnb together, and we were mentored out of Rolf's office on the Gold Coast. So we literally saw each other 24/7 for about 2 years straight. And when he was running his broking business towards the end, it just wasn't for him. He wasn't into broking. It wasn't, giving him the same satisfaction that I was before. And he just started playing computer games. And I love computer games, and I would love to play computer games and play more of it. But he played computer games straight for like 6 months. And towards the end, I could tell he was just bored out of his brain. And that's when he
games can you play? Like how many times can you conquer Halo or
yeah. And then at the end of it, he packed up, went traveling to South America. Since then, he started the YouTube channel, and he's more alive than ever, and he's loving life, and he's found a purpose. So that's actually what I'm a little bit unsure of. If I pull up stubs and stop doing anything, I know my personality, I'll get bored. I saw his look that he had when he was playing the computer games. I don't want to be there. So I enjoy what I do. I love broking. I love property investing. Once I find something that I think will occupy a lot of that time, then yeah, maybe I will. But at the moment, I haven't come up with that answer. In saying that, we are putting a lot of things in place too. And part of the reason for investing everything with the recurring income, I guess the biggest thing working towards now is I've got 2 little ones and also family. So I want to be there to see my kids grow up. So that's the biggest thing at the moment.
Yeah, no, awesome. There's no easy answer for it. Here's a good question, because you started when banking lending was a little bit easier. So how can we do, what was it say? How many properties do you think you can get if you start now with the new lending rules?
Hard to say. There's so many variables in that. So you have to get someone to model that out for you. But if, say, for instance, you took my same scenario, I've got one young client at the moment. He's in his 20s. His salary is about 70,000.
Yep.
He is rent vesting. He started with me with one property, I'll say about 2 years ago, and is just now selling his 5th property. Wow, and I reckon he can probably get another 1 or 2 more.
What, with $70,000 salary?
Yeah.
Absurd.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
what's the value of them?
So they're all like 300 to 400. He was buying for 300-400. So he's got one property in Sydney, a unit in Sydney, 2 properties in Logan, and now he's buying in Perth. So he's got 2 in Perth. So that's a 5th. Yeah.
He's just following you.
But it doesn't have to be in those areas, but that kind of is an example. So by all means, you can do it. Rent vesting, living at home rent free, that helps. Buying properties with a decent rental return, that helps. So, you might not be able to get to the 3.3 million pre-APRA, but you can definitely have a really good crack at it.
Yeah. I think this kind of answers Aaron's question. I thought Aaron pretty much watches our show every week, so he's a big supporter of the show. So I wanted to give him a call out. But I think so. It sounds like with this person, and none of like if this is your circumstances, that's not advice to go and do that. You go and speak to your broker, speak to your accountant, all those good people. But it sounds like what this person's done is they've rent vested, they stayed at home, they've also kind of aligned themselves with a broker, and probably did they also buy properties? Imagine the rent on those would have been maybe 5 to 7% yield.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
And also, he's been lucky to bought in Brisbane at the right time. So we're pulling out equity from his Brisbane properties to fund the Perth properties. So there's luck involved in that. If he bought in 2015 when I first started buying Brisbane, he would have sat on his hands. So some of it is luck, some of it you make on your own accord. Yeah.
Can I? Sorry. I was going to ask a question. That's something that we're going to see happen, or two things are likely going to happen. I don't like to get the crystal ball out, but number one, interest rates are likely to, or the cash rates are likely to increase a little bit, which may lead to the second thing, which is property prices, because they couldn't keep going. I don't think they can keep going at 20 to 30%. So with that, how does somebody overcome these challenges that are likely to happen?
I think that everyone should budget for high interest rates. Like, you'll be foolish to run your cash flow analysis when the cash rate was at an all-time low. Like, it has to go up. Like I would use anywhere between. So my kind of precursor is, what are the fixed rates the banks that are giving at the moment? Well, investment interest only fixed for 2 years is anywhere between 4.5% to 5%. So I would at least use that as a litmus test for the next 2 years moving forward, what that will be. If anything, it also, like in terms of strategy moving forward, it would even be more so in terms of finding properties where the cash flow is a little bit more sufficient to be able to cover those higher interest rates. Like, if your rental returns are 2% and rates hit 5%, then it's going to be quite stressful. Probably have trouble sleeping at night. You're so in the red. Even before the expenses, you're on down 3%. But if you're buying properties at 5, 6, 7% rental return and the interest rate's 4.5%, 5%, then at least you've given yourself a little bit of a chance to be able to mitigate that. Now, I think also what happens, and what you're kind of seeing in the current environment with rents, is unfortunately when the interest rates go up, the rent also has a run. It might not be immediately, but over time, some of the expenses will just kind of get passed down to the tenants. So you're starting to see that with the rental increases. So, and also, I guess the other thing too is, with rates going up, I probably wouldn't rush too much. Like, don't rush into the market. The fear of missing out that was in the last 2 years, I think, are gone. I think take your time. And for the markets that have done phenomenally well, I'll be a little bit more cautious. Sydney and Melbourne, I'll probably be a little bit more cautious. In other markets where they're starting to tick back up, maybe you can be a little bit more aggressive, but with each rate increase, you've got a little bit more time on your hands. So buy something that's really good. Don't just jump in the market for the sake of jumping in the market. I think it's the last 2 or 3 years, it's almost like you buy anywhere in Australia and you make money. I think moving forward, it's not going to be that easy.
So let's scrap everything. All of a sudden, you've got no properties. You're back at work on 80K a year. Interest rates are going up. It's starting all over again. What would you do today? What would you do today? How would you start, and how would you get to your fifth property? Like, what would that look like if you? Is
that your worst nightmare, Michael?
Yeah. So I would spend a good 3 to 6 months forming my team. So read property chat, follow this forum, listen to podcasts, educate yourself as much as you can. I find when you first get into property investing, you have a certain series of questions, but as you become more experienced, those questions then develop too. And the people you work with will be able to help you more when your questions also become a little bit better. So
ask better questions, get better answers.
100%. So spend your time doing that. Now, once you've formed your team and you're ready to go, then I would, find the properties that meets your needs. So whether it's like, buying properties that are a little bit more cash flow positive because you need that amount, that cash flow to work, or properties a little bit more equity, maybe a little bit more blue chip to then cover that equity gap. I would spend a lot of time in researching that area. I mean, we can go into it a little bit more in terms of researching, but one thing I'll say sometimes I see with beginner investors is one day they'll be looking in Brisbane, next day they're looking in Adelaide, third day they're looking in Perth, fourth day they're looking at commercial properties. It's like, even if the deal of a lifetime was staring you in the face,
they wouldn't know.
And you wouldn't have the balls to execute on that.
Yeah.
Like I'll give you another example. I remember early on when I was living on the Gold Coast, every Saturday I'll have clients flying up from Sydney and Melbourne, and we'll go through open homes on a Saturday through the Logan properties. And I precisely remember this one where we went to auction. It was in Waterford West. It was a little bit run down, so it needed probably about 10 to 15,000. It got passed in at auction at 230K. It was less than land value. It was a bank mortgagee, and they would have let it go for 230. But my client, because they hadn't done enough research, didn't buy it. Then a couple of months later, they ended up buying a worse property, mainly because at that time, then they kind of realized how good that first one was. So, the area doesn't matter so much. I've seen people make money in anywhere in Australia, but the key advice is focus on that area and try to become an expert at it. Then at least then when you see a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom come up, the median prices for for that type of product is say 400,000, but for, the circumstances, you can pick it up for 360, then great, boom, you can then make that move. So I would spend your time then getting to know that. And that process takes time. It's not, by next week or the week after. It might take you a good couple of months to get your eye in on the market. There's so many resources that you can use to learn an area, like, go to Property Chat, type in a suburb. There's probably 10 pages on that one suburb, or go to the forum, type in that and see what other people are saying. Another favorite of mine is go to the properties that are being rented in that area and just give the property managers a call. Ask the property manager what's a good pocket in that suburb. If you ask a real estate agent, he'll tell you every pocket is the best thing. It's like, there's no bad pockets. But if you ask a property manager, or you go get recommendations, where's a good property manager in Brisbane or where's a good property manager in Perth, give them a call and then ask them, I'm looking to buy in the suburb. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? The amount of information that you can learn through that process will, far outweigh a lot of other things, and then use that in your property selection process.
So would you be going down the, so one of the things I'm kind of hearing from you is you force value at the beginning. So there is the buy and hold. And if you're a busy professional, you can go down that buy and hold route, but you just need to know that a set and forget is going to take longer to get your deposit back because you haven't forced the value. You haven't forced the equity. Someone like we had Terry on last week who built a large portfolio as well, but he forced the value every single time. And that's what allowed him to get to whatever he got to.
And again, it comes down to what your resources are. Like if you're starting out with like really good equity, you've paid off your home, you've got a mountain of equity sitting there, you don't need to force the value. You've got the equity sitting there, go off and then use that and then buy properties. Had a client, we've been helping him for the last 12 months, and he bought, 3 properties in Sydney in the last cycle, just didn't do anything, just sat on them. And we pulled out close to $1 million this time in terms of equity. He's up to his 11th property already in the space of a year. So he didn't need to manufacture it. He could just go off and buy the property. And he bought just when Brisbane was starting to move quite heavily. So it wouldn't have been worth his time to do the renovation. It would have just been out of the market for too long. Because he had that equity already there, then just to buy, hold, and ride the market was a little bit better. But if your situation where, like, say, for instance, when I started, you didn't have a lot of equity, the only way that you could grow is to force it, then you'll go down that path. So to answer your question, how I would start, probably to determine which of those resources you're lacking, and then kind of to focus on that. And the properties you buy, make sure that it matches that resource. That will then allow you to go a little bit. For
most people, it's probably missing equity, not necessarily, but unless you.
Like it's hard to say. Like it honestly depends. If you're young, first starting out, it will be equity. So to answer that question, I'll probably be looking to create some sweat equity. And generally, when you're first starting out too, like you would have a decent income, you don't have a lot of debt.
Maybe
you
not
don't
any
need,
kids.
yeah, you don't have kids. You don't need to buy something that's that cash flow positive. You can, get away with buying something that's a little bit more blue chip. That's why a lot of my starting clients, they were buying in Moreton Bay Council. So, a little bit less cash flow, but more capital growth potential. Great. That property suits them so much better than Logan. So I was, going, that's an area potentially that you could look at. So it really kind of depends on your circumstances. But I would form the team, do the research, find the property that then meets our resources. And then after that, it's just, the other hardest part in property investing is also just consistency. It's
balls to execute.
And like I've met so many investors also where it's like, they get really interested in property investing for a couple of months, but then life gets in the way and then they kind of fall by the wayside. And that's the most common thing. That's basically the story of in terms of gym and fitness for me. I might get motivated or, it's like, after my touch career, this is kind of what it is. Before then it was okay. But now it's like, I joined F45 and then I'll come up with an excuse that I can't do it anymore.
It's pretty cold. You can't go out in this weather. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then I'll wonder, kind of 12 months later why I don't have a six pack. It's like the same thing. So yeah.
Then you get a six pack and sleepy.
Yeah. One question. I've got a question about property management. Like I can't imagine managing 30, like, do you have a part-time staff member that looks after all this? Because I know that there's a lot of money to be made in property management. Like if you really focused on managing that portfolio, you could rinse so much more out of it. Like, how do you think about property management?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I've just got, like for a long time had a really bad run of property managers. And, even now we're continually changing property managers, trying to find good property managers for certain areas and so on and so forth. Now, I will also say this, the biggest pain point in terms of the property journey is actually holding them, maintaining them. That's the biggest headache. And that's the one that, is not fun about holding this property portfolio. So for us, another benefit of having the 25 properties in Logan is my wife actually started her own property management company. So she's based in Sydney, but she manages all of our properties. So she does all the routine inspections. So we hire someone on the ground there to do all the routine inspections. She does all the leases. She organizes the trades to go out. She knows all of our tenants, like on a very, very kind of personal basis. And ever since we started doing that, I think we're, a little bit more than 2 years, the properties that we know the best and that are most on top of in terms of income coming in are the properties that we manage ourselves. Now, it wouldn't have made sense if we had one property here, one property there. And this wasn't really kind of our idea when it started out. It just kind of evolved into that. But I have to give big props to my wife. I think she's listening in the other room. If it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be able to hold this property portfolio.
Yeah.
This is another interesting question. Interesting that the person who's this Jeff Mills? Like, it's spelled my first name wrong and spelled my last
Jeff
name
Mills.
is completely different. Jeff Mills. I've been replaced, usurped. What does he do about insurance? Are we talking about landlord insurance? Or what kind of insurance is this person? Are we talking house? And I suppose, what do you do about insurance?
Are you also getting a big discount? You have 25 properties in Logan. Are you getting a discount on your insurance? Are you getting a discount on your property management? Are you getting a discount on trades and those type of things because you've got the economics of scale? You've got so many people. They want to be your friends because you can serve 25 properties for them.
100%. Yeah. So in terms of property management, well, the properties that we manage ourselves, the rental commissions is another stream of business income. In terms of trades, like when you do your fire alarms and so on and so forth, we then negotiate with the companies and say, hey, look, can you do 25 in one go? Tend to get slightly better rates. In terms of insurance, yes, I actually have through the business, an account with insurance companies that we then get a discount in that regard. So I think there are advantages to having a large property portfolio. There are disadvantages, but those aspects are some of the advantages. I'll say this thing in terms of also insurance. When I first started, the way that I shot for insurance was which one gave me the cheapest. So, and the insurance that I used, a lot of it was with the corresponding bank. So if I banked with Westpac, I'll get the insurance with a Westpac. After trying to make claims and numerous instances like that, there's one area that I wouldn't recommend too much to skimp on, and that's insurance. Early on, some of those claims saved my ass. It was kind of, like, especially when you first start out, if you have a property, like one property out of 3 properties that's not giving you rent and that's, being trashed, that's a big hit on your property portfolio. So having good insurance early on, very, very important.
Yeah.
Let's maybe only time for one last question, because otherwise I think there's still almost 150 people watching this live. It's just been, the people are just loving it. We could probably go for 4 hours. We won't go 4 hours, of course, but
while we wait for that, how do you monitor? Do you have software? Like, how do you keep on top of the property portfolio? Like, how do you actually?
Mine's so basic. It's like, if I sent you my spreadsheet, you'll laugh. It's literally just Excel with like a couple of columns. Like my expense list is like item, amount, did I pay it, yes or no, and that's literally it.
You don't have Xero, or you don't have QuickBooks or something like that.
No. I mean, a lot of it is through the property management software that my missus runs. So a lot of it is in that already. But that's 25 properties. There's still another, 14 properties. So those are in Excel spreadsheets. We save all the invoices in the folder. My folders are very clean, and I have a naming convention behind it and so on and so forth. But I don't use elaborate software or anything like that. Like I said in the top of the core, it's it's simple. Yeah, it's very, very basic.
Simple but not easy.
Yeah,
simple but not easy.
Yeah,
I love it. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think people are shy. I think there's been well over 100 comments. Just like some of them interesting comments float through, of course. I don't know if anybody. I think everybody's all questioned out. I'll see if we can. See if we pick one.
I've got a question. So, just a quick. I don't know if it's going to be a quick one. I don't know the answer. But your focus is cash flow. And why not commercial? Like, why have you put so much of an asset base in residential instead of just, I'll just go to commercial? I don't
know if his focus is cash flow, though, Joe. I think that's just what he needed at the time, or needed.
Yeah, so I'm kind of add to that. Our recent purchases have been like, more so development blocks. So that's what we've been picking up more recently, mainly because the portfolio can now hold those. So that's kind of evolved to that. To answer your question in terms of commercial is something that I would love to get into. And I think moving forward, I will get into more. I'm a big believer to kind of building your foundation property portfolio so you have that base around you. Like residential is just safer. It's, try going through commercial through COVID. It can be a little bit risky, but there are so many other pros to commercial that resi doesn't. So, you have the tenant pay for your outgoings, you've got a higher yield, but you've also got other cons. You will need a bigger deposit. If it's vacant for a little bit longer. I think the crux of it, and something that I've realized over time, is there's so many ways to make money in property investing. Like I've got clients that develop, and they just develop within a certain area, and they do it really well, and they do very well from it. I've spoken to other people on Property Chat. There's one guy there with like 100 commercial properties. It's absolutely insane. Like he will just, like his property portfolio makes mine look like a plankton. It's obscene. And he only just does commercial. No, I'm residential. He's like, why are you doing residential? But his skill set, his knowledge is so advanced in that area. So I think what I've realized is play to your strength. If you focus in on an area and then get really good at it, you will do well in property investing. So to commercial, yes, one day I'll invest the time, learn more about commercial. And if I feel that I've got enough knowledge to beat the average investor and do better at it, I'll then move more into that.
Yeah, I think this is a question we'll have to tackle in round 2, but about how to start building a portfolio, because we've spoken about it throughout this session, but I think we could really nail down somewhere on that. But no, that's amazing. It's just great to hear you've sort of have considered, but you just want to stay in your lane, because otherwise, if you try and sort of start buying commercial in in Darwin or Hobart or wherever it is, you don't know that market. You know Logan, and you know sort of now you're sort of starting to learn Perth. You're starting to learn these different.
Yeah, and it's like, like the other comment that I also get is like, you're so risky in terms of buying so many properties. I think by nature, I'm a very safe person. That's why I've kind of stuck in my lane a fair bit. And I probably left a lot on the table too, There's a lot of opportunities that I think I could have gone down that would have also ended very well. But I think, also, the other things in terms of dabbling in shares, dabbling in crypto, I think a lot of the times I've come to realize that the only time I made money is actually when I knew that asset class very well.
Yeah, don't do crypto for me. No more crypto for me.
Poor Joe. Yeah.
No more Luna.
The platitude, just the comments, people are really. I'm really blown away, and it speaks to the guests, and I think just your about the way that you think about your property investing, but also your approach to, I think everything. They say how you do anything is how you do everything. So I think that you're very thorough. You might keep it simple, but hasn't been. You make it look very easy, but So you've really you've just worked incredibly hard as well. I imagine. I don't probably don't need to say that, but I think that's the thing. You probably haven't. You made it sound very easy, but I think you've probably worked very hard.
No, and I wouldn't. Yeah, it's definitely not easy. Yeah, I'll definitely say that. Like, don't go into this thinking it's, if someone promises you that you're going to make a lot of money, there's going to be no stress, sign a piece of paper, and you're going to be a multimillionaire, then run the other way. This is not easy. Yeah.
I've got one question come through that I don't know. It's from someone, and it's interesting. So he said, use me as an example, maxing out with a major and mid-tier lender with 10 to 12 properties. Once I cap out and start using Pepper, what to do once maxed? In the current environment, do I just stack offsets for 3 to 5 years and wait till the next downturn, or buy on 30% LVRs to continually buying each year, gradually reducing the LVR and increasing the rent, or keep maxing out each year after that?
I think it depends on, it definitely makes sense. And it was the same kind of question that I had towards the end of my corporate career. I think it depends on the pace that you want to go at and what your goals are. If you're happy with one a year and continue to trickle along, maybe one every 2 years, depending on what the savings, because it'll be very hard to pull equity at that point, and also what the borrowing capacity is, then great. The other instance too is, like I've seen many people go down this path in terms of clients, is you get to a point where you're happy with your property portfolio, even if you didn't have an income, if the properties did its thing, then you're well and truly on the way to being financially free. Then why not pursue something that you really enjoy and that you're passionate about? Naturally, you're going to be better at it because you love what you do. And because of that, maybe the business will do well. So I've seen clients go down the mortgage broking route, buyer's agent route, create property courses. So if you can do that well, and that business income is sufficient to be able to then borrow against, you can then take your investing to the next level. So, that listener's done phenomenally well already. That's a great property portfolio. It just depends on the pace that he wants to do, then continue with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's, and I'd add to that, and you did say it's about the goals. I think the thing a lot of people focus on, growing a 20 to 30 or 100 property portfolio. To me, I think that just seems like a headache. I don't. To me, I'm happy with 8 or 10 or whatever. Yeah, maybe once I get to that, once I get there, Michael, I might change my tune. But yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, if you asked me in 2013, do I want to hit 30, 40 properties? I would say you're crazy. It's just why would you want that many? But I guess when you go from 2 to 3 and then you add them one by one, it doesn't feel that different. But it's
the drive is still there, and it didn't take away that drive. The drive to
probably
go
increase it
bigger and harder.
To be honest, the drive, and I know when I was going through kind of Facebook, someone mentioned that, do you still get enough joy from the properties? I would say the joy is tied to your goals, and probably something we didn't touch on, and I'm a big believer in. My earlier properties gave me so much more joy. When I even though it was a crap property, my 10th property just made me feel so good. And when I bought that property and like my 14th property settled, and the day after I handed in my resignation, that feeling was surreal. Like that just felt so good. The 39th property, did it feel that good? Not really, because that's not tied to a burning goal. But those earlier properties, I knew every single one that I bought meant I could leave work a little bit sooner. So that's why, like kind of that consistency, getting things done. The only way that anyone's really going to get something done is if you have a goal that's really, really burning. Since I quit work, I've had other goals, but looking back, it hasn't been burning like that. So yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right, I think that's a great time to finish round one. If you come back, we'll have to unpack some more, like what's next, and even maybe some of the deeper kind of fundamental things you look at in properties. I think people would love that probably.
Cool.
Yeah,
sounds good.
This has been an epic session. Thank you so much. Well, how can people get in touch with you? Because you're a mortgage broker, and I don't want to flood your inbox too much.
I think you might.
How could?
It's
too late, Michael.
No, so companies for mortgagechannel.com.au, so you can go through the website, you can put through inquiries. That's probably the best way. But yeah, I mean, I will say this too, we are, even before coming on this call, quite busy. I know Jeff's mentioned a couple of times, and I've, come up with excuses every single time, but this time I ran out of excuses. But yeah, so we are busy in terms of urgent inquiries, probably not the best, but if you want something that's done, that's very thorough, planned and mapped out very, very precisely, then yeah, definitely can help.
What's your kind of ideal client? Like what would be, I mean, not to exclude anyone, but what would be an ideal kind of situation to have a chat with you?
To be honest, there's no ideal client, like I get as much satisfaction helping that, young investor that's on, 60, 70K go from 1 to 5 properties, as opposed to that person that had $1 million worth of equity. The main thing I'll say in terms of my client and how I filter through my clients is whether you're teachable. If I can teach you and, the things that I suggest you take on board, then great, we can work together. But if I've come up with this modeling and this plan, and then you're like, oh, that's great, but I'll go down this other direction, then,
I'm going to buy this house and land package.
No, but yeah.
It's a 3% yield and all that sort of, it's just not ticking the lending boxes.
Correct, yeah. As long as you're teachable, then yeah, we can definitely work together. Yeah.
Love it. Michael, this has been unreal. Thank you very much. Let's do it. Any final words, Jeff?
I just wanted to say you've recently sort of had you are another new father, so I really I know you may not be necessarily getting a lot of sleep, so we'll get. But I really appreciate just the humility that you have, and that you took a call from me on a train a couple of years ago, and that you sort of remembered that it speaks volumes to the type of person you are. You're not necessarily in it, and that sort of you're solving people's problems. So that's why, good on you for staying extremely humble and just being out there to help people achieve their financial or passive income goals, whatever it is. So, yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Love your work.
Cool. Awesome. We got internationals live from Luxembourg.
I think I know who that is. So hi, Justin.
Go buy a property. See you guys later.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.